Welcome to Between Authors. I am your host, author Adrian Lopez. What is it that excites us as a reader? It's finding that book or author that you may never have heard of, sort of like the treasure hunt as a reader. The goal for my podcast is to bring to you those authors or books that you may never have found before, but may be the treasure you've been searching for all along. Today in episode 34, I bring to you author Shawna Fletcher. We're going to go over a little bit about who she is, what she's published, maybe what she's working on, and what her plans are for the future. Welcome to the show, Shawna.
Ooh. So about me, as an introduction, I'm a debut author. I've written my whole life, but I'm a wife, a mother. I still work full-time job because writing doesn't pay the bills, but that's pretty much me in a nutshell: wife, mother, and writer.
Why don't you give the viewers a little idea of what your influences are? What influenced you creatively? And it doesn't necessarily have to be authors and books.
So there were some, authors like as a kid that just really got me into reading, which, translated then into writing. And they're cheesy now, but, when I was in like third grade, it was Beverly Cleary who wrote all the Ramona and Beezus stories, which I read like every single one of those. And then it was R.L. Stine who got me into, the Goosebumps and the scary stories. And then there was, and I can't remember but it was the scary stories to tell in the dark. And I can't remember who wrote all those to save my life, but those books as well. And it's funny because I don't really write those stories, but those were what got me into reading and writing. But I'm a huge movie person, and it's funny because I'm on two opposite ends of the spectrum. I'm a sucker for a love story, and I'll cry like a baby. But then my comfort movies are horror movies. Yeah. And so it's like there's no in between. It's either we're having a great love story or everybody's dying and it's a slasher. So it's like I'm at the opposite ends of the spectrum. And then just personally, who influenced me was my great grandmother, and she lived with us until she died when I was like 12 or 13, and she just lived through so much that happened in the 1900s and all the stories that she would tell me. And I was always like, you need to write those down. You need to make that into a book, But that personally is who influenced me.
Yeah. It's interesting that you're a big horror movie buff, because so am I. I mean, horror's always been my absolute favorite. It's interesting that you don't necessarily write on that side of it. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought maybe in the future you might try to attempt it, or even bring aspects into some of your books?
I don't know that I'll go as far as trying to write an actual horror, but like I do have a couple that I've outlined that are like mystery thrillers where, it's not slasher gore, but it's the mystery thriller side. And it has nothing to do with anything except for my influence. But when I was, it's a funny story. When I was like 5 years old, my older brother was big into, at the time it was, Friday the 13th and Halloween. And my parents left us with a babysitter, and he literally put me down in a chair, put a 2x4 over my legs. I had my Cabbage Patch doll, and I cried for the entire movie of Friday the 13th. And he made me watch the entire thing. And so it was either you learned to love horror movies in my house or you hated your life, because he was going to make it miserable. And so I just learned to embrace it from there.
It will be, it will be interesting because generally, most authors pull from, not only your experiences and stuff like that, but you do pull from kind of your loves, right? And it will be interesting to see going forward, what aspects of horror you may pull into there. even if you don't necessarily write the actual genre, there may be some stuff, like you said, a mystery thriller where you could do some of that, and then you start pulling in some of those aspects into your stories.
Yep. There was the first person I let read Pull of the Moon when I finished it, she was like, "Oh, I bet it's going to be a great horror movie," and I was like, "Yeah, it's not even horror book." And I was like, she was like, "I just see you writing that," and I was like, "I don't know, that's not even close to what this is."
Yeah, it will be, because horror really kind of molded a lot of what I do. I mean, horror and Japanese cinema really are my two main things, right? And there's a lot of things I pull from both usually when I'm doing, writing or doing some of the stuff. Even sometimes with some of the poetry I've done has been on the horror side, just because that's, kind of some of the stuff I love.
Right.
But yeah, it will be interesting to see how that moves going forward. You may not even be aware of it as you're doing it. It just, you may pull certain, things from that genre into your books. So let's talk about your book, Pull of the Moon. Why don't you give the viewers a little idea or a little synopsis about what the book's about?
So Pull of the Moon, it is mainly told through Sabina's point of view. She's the female main character, and she's 39. She's a new widow. Her husband has just died of a massive heart attack, and that's not a spoiler because it literally happens from the very beginning. And she had moved away once she got married, and now she has, a 15-year-old son. She can't make it work where she is away from her family, so she moves back to her parents' house in her hometown to get back on her feet. And while she's there, she runs into her first love, her childhood sweetheart, soulmate, who's Nate. And he has 2 kids. He's divorced. He has a very interesting drug-addicted ex-wife who likes to complicate his life. And they reconnect. And so this follows their current love story, but it also, there's a lot of flashbacks to how they fell in love and their childhood days. And then this universe that has continually, ever since they were like 12 years old, it's brought them together. Does it let them continue their epic love story, or does it tear them apart again? And what happens, and how does their life go from there?
Yeah. So does it touch on the soulmate, twin flame, karmic type of relationships, which could go either way, right? So does it touch on that, or is it just kind of like a background of the story?
No, it touches on that, and there are things, without giving away like too much of it, but there are things where Sabina is like, I didn't even realize that this is what that meant until now, and now looking back, it's, it is that. And like, people are also offended that I've killed off Michael, who's her husband, at the beginning. And I'm like, well, he has to die, or otherwise she's cheating on him. And I'm like, she's not gonna, and I'm like, that's what sets the whole thing in motion. Yeah. But I'm like, he doesn't fully go away. So there, there's certain like universe and kind of like manifestation things, and it's not so much like God divine soulmates. It's more of like the universe soulmates and bringing them together. And like they both realize it at a point, and then it falls apart, and then now that, because it happens 20 years later, so it's now that they've been apart for 2 decades, how are they different? How are they going to not make the same mistakes? So it does touch on that. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, because honestly, that, in that realm of soulmates, twin flames, or whatever, there is generally, the growth factor, right? So if one is growing at a different rate than the other, that's generally where the separation occurs, right? So that is a good point. As you come 20 years later on completely different paths, and whatever the growth that was, again, does it mesh, or is it still not quite at the same point they would need to be.
Mm-hmm.
So in this book, did you have a favorite scene that's in the book? And favorite can be however you want to look at it, the actual scene itself, how it came together, thinking of the scene, writing it.
Um, it's funny because I like the ending, but the ending is what makes everybody cry. And I cry every time I read it, so I get it. But it was my favorite part to write because honestly, when I had the whole thing came from a dream. And I'd had this dream literally probably for 15 years, and I just never had time to write it. I had started it, and then I got married. I moved to another state. I had a kid. I was in school. I was working full time. I didn't have time to write. And so it was like once a week, these dreams and these people would have these different situations, and it was always the same people. And I was like, I've got to get this out of my head. And so when I sat down to write it, I knew where I wanted it to end. And I'd always had a clear picture of how it was going to end. And then in doing, like just seeing like where people are at with what they're reading these days. And I was like, okay, nobody's going to want to read it if I end it like this. And so I changed it. And then I hated it. I mean, I was like, this is terrible. This is not how this story was supposed to end. And I was like, forget it. I want to put it back the way I wanted it, And so I did put it back the way I wanted it. And I think that's why it's my favorite scene. Yeah. Is like, and it's not just one scene. It's more of like the last 2 chapters are my favorite, but they're also the most sad. But it's also that whole thing where I'm a sucker for a good love story. And, in real life, most love stories at some point, even though a love story might go on for 30, 40 years, there's going to be some point where it ends. And, so it's like, okay, well, you just got to deal with me here to get to this. And I'm sorry that it has to happen, but it happens.
Yeah. And, it's an excellent point because, you had the idea of what your story you wanted, right? And you almost changed it kind of like you said for what you knew everybody was kind of looking for and excited for. And it just, you're like, I can't do it. This is not going to work.
Yeah.
So like, you went back to really what your entire idea was. And, it's really an excellent point because, I always mention on here about, the author finding what their voice is, right? What their style, their voice, it really is their voice, right? Because you're putting out there from you. And, it's a good thing for younger, writers or authors to realize not to try to chase what's popular, whether it's a genre, trend, trope, whatever, because it's not you, right? You're not being genuine to what your voice is, and that will come through. Readers will feel that it's not genuine, and it's just not gonna work, right? So you always want to be genuine to your voice and what you really want.
Very true.
On the opposite end of that, was there a hard scene for you to write that was in the book?
I will say that the spicy scenes, they're fun to write, but they're hard to write too, because you're trying to get the readers, in that frame of mind. And like, I don't think I realized like how difficult it is to write those scenes, because then you're trying not to use the same word for the same body part over and over and over. And it's like, so then you've got to figure out, well, what other word can I call this? And then like, some words you're like, that word is stupid and I don't want to use that. And, and then it's like, am I being repetitive? And then you got to go back and you got to reread this scene to make sure that it makes sense and that it's flowing like actual humans do it, and it's like, it's just kind of awkward to write, and I don't know. I mean, I was not anticipating that when I started to write those scenes. So that surprised me.
I can imagine how, if especially if it's since it's your first one and not really doing that before, it is almost like a different mindset, or it's a different skill set, really, like you said, to try to
Yeah.
make sure you're not repeating, you're not taking it out of the moment,
Yeah.
because the whole point of the ones that the readers that love that want to stay in the moment. And if you're doing certain things where it's repetitive, it's just going to take it right out of it, right?
Well, and like in the first draft, I would have where the scene was going to be. I would literally just write input scene, and then I'd just go on with like the story, because I was like, I got to get the story out of my head,
Yeah.
and then I'll just fill in, this. And so then when I went back to fill that in, and that's when I was like, okay, should I just put that, like, okay, they kissed and they made love and that's it. And then I was like, no, that doesn't do it justice, because I was like, you're not feeling how they feel. And like, it's not like, I feel like some books put the spice in there just to have the spice in there.
Yeah.
And like, it's not really adding to the story, it's just spice. And I felt like where I was putting theirs was more so solidifying and like breathing life into their relationship.
Yeah. It's interesting too, now that I think about it, how you mentioned that you had the dream, the overall dream, for about 15 years, but you never got a chance to write it. And it could be the same thing where you weren't ready to write it, right? You needed the extra life experiences, right? Like you said, getting married, having children, going to school, going to work, getting a job. All those things, all those experiences maybe gave you the little extra that you needed for the story that you may not have had you tried to write it earlier, right? When you started having the dream.
Yep.
So, and it just goes back to, again, it's never too late to start writing. You don't have to start when you can start later in life, but it could have been that you just, the life experiences for you weren't there yet to do this story justice, right? And now that you had it, you're able to put it all together the way you really wanted to.
Well, and I think it adds, because the kids they're side characters, but they're also big parts of the story, because, they're single parents and those kids come as a package. And I don't think, had I tried to write it before I had my child, that I really would have been able to do justice to that parent-child relationship and truly write her as a mother, without having my child. Yeah. So you're right.
For this book, like you said, it was really came from a dream. Most of the premise of the story, or most of maybe the story in general. But did you do any specific research for this book, for the story?
I did. So there's a big portion, and I can't say what it is, but there's a health issue in there. And I had to do a lot of research, because I was like, okay, people are going to pick me apart if I don't get it right. Because when I used to write fan fiction back before, like the early 2000s. And one time I made one mistake about a health thing, and somebody just would not let it go. And I was like, okay, either way, like, you knew what I was saying. And, that was just fan fiction. And so I was like, okay, I've got to get this out. And so I did a lot of research on medical websites about it. I also, because my day job is in the medical field, and I actually currently work for heart surgeons. And so I was like, hey, what is this called? I'm like texting the doctors that I work for, and they're like, why, do we have a patient? And I was like, no, it's unrelated. I just need to know what the name of this is, And then I have a friend that's also an ER doctor, and I was asking him the same thing. I was like, hey, if somebody comes into your ER, XXX, and he was like, why are you asking me these random questions? So I got not just Google, and, I went to the actual medical professionals, because I was like, y'all aren't going to do this to me in an actual book again. Yeah. So, yes.
Yeah. And it's crazy, how you may not even think about it, but there will be somebody that knows, right? And if you try to just get through it, somebody's just going to pick it out. And for them, it's going to, it may ruin the story, because they're going to focus on this one little thing. You're like, it's maybe a paragraph of the entire book, but
Yep.
for them it's going to stand out, and it's crazy how important it is to do. Sometimes it's just a little bit of research, right? It's just like a little
Yep.
sprinkle of something in there, but yeah, it's important. It really is
Yep.
for the readers.
Yep.
So you did mention you used to do some fan fiction. Did you find, or did you notice that the way you write changed from doing that through doing this book?
Yes. When I was doing fan fiction, it was more of like, I mean, I wasn't so much focused on like character building and like, the arc of the character and the growth. It was and it was more of like, you put out a chapter at a time, and then you see how people react to that, and then you put out another chapter, and you can change it as you go. And I also I didn't then, when I go back and look at the stories that I wrote then, it was much more dialogue driven than it was setting the scene and the feelings of those people. And um and I was young and just really just writing. I was never trying to really do anything with that. But I'm also like a very direct person just in general. I don't do a lot of like sugarcoating or beating around the bush, like they say, and um, so that's really how the fan fiction was. It was more direct. And then as I started to write this book, you write it and you get it out of your head, the first draft, just to get it out and get it where it's going, and then you go back to fill it in and flesh it out. And that's when I was really focusing on the feelings of those characters and trying to get whoever's reading it to feel that same thing that the character's feeling. And I wasn't really worried about that when I was doing fan fiction.
Yep. Um, so are you working on something right now? Are you currently working on a project or on a book?
I'm currently working on like about 15 different things.
I know that's technically the answer, but I was like, is there one you want to try to mention, or? And again,
Yeah,
don't tell us anything too much for it.
no. So there was one that I had written, and it was kind of like a short story novella type. Um, and it was when I got a writing prompt that was write a short story based on a song, and it was just pick any song, and I didn't think that it would turn into like the whole big long story that it did. But it really got me into it. And so then I wanted to go back once I finished Pull of the Moon, and I wanted to flesh his story out. And it's funny because it's written mainly from a male point of view, but I wanted to flesh it out. And I was like, I think this could be a really good actual novel. I've just got to figure out where he's going to go. And I'm probably about like halfway through it right now. He's just the male main character has had a very, very rough life, and he's kind of depressing to write because like, I don't know if you do this, but like I have to get into like the mind frame of what I'm writing. And so I do that by listening to music. So I've got my playlist for this work in progress, and then I'm trying to like get myself into his frame, and I'm like, I can't stay in it long because then I'm just like depressed or I'm grumpy, and I'm like, gee, so that's why it's taken me longer. I should be done with it, but it's very taxing emotionally. And I don't know how people write if they don't get in that frame of mind. They're better than me if they can.
Yeah, there was another author that he wrote. I think it was a mystery. It was like a murder mystery or something. And there was a character that he said he wrote that he just absolutely hated. Right, everything about the character, but people love the character, and he's like, I never want to be in that mindset of that character ever again. He goes, I absolutely hated the entire period to write that point of view, but I needed to for the story. He goes, but I will never revisit that again. I just can't get in that mindset again.
Right. Well, like I'm working on that, and then I've got I'm obsessed with cults. too. Like I watch every documentary that I think that's ever existed on cults. And so I've got an outline for one that involves a cult. And then I've got one of the thriller mystery types. And then I've just outlined like a Southern Gothic mystery thriller. So I've got several that are outlined, and I've just got to, I'm trying to get through the one I'm like halfway through because I don't want to shelf it again. Because I feel like I might not ever finish it.
This is a completely different question, but is Pull of the Moon a standalone? Is it just the one story? It's
definitely a standalone.
It's a standalone?
Yeah, it's funny. One of the people on TikTok just read it, and when she was probably about halfway through, and she messaged me, and she was like, "Oh my God, I hope there's a sequel." And I was like, and I didn't want to ruin it for her, and so I just was like, I'm glad you're enjoying it. Like, and then when she finished it, she was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you." Yeah, so it's definitely a standalone. Somebody said that they wanted a follow up on her son, and they want to know his story and where it goes. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe one day, but we're moving on from them. Like they've been in my head long enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that was my question. Cause I know you said you ended it right where everybody cries during the scene talk. In my head, I was like, okay, I know probably that story doesn't continue, but, it is interesting because sometimes like the one person asked, you do have other characters that people kind of gravitate to or latched onto, and they may say, okay, but what happens in this person? Because whatever the main story was a big life event for maybe those side characters, and they're interested in that.
Yep, I wasn't anticipating that, so.
So going, you have your 15 works in progress, right? Which is what most of us are constantly doing. But a little different question in terms of future. So, do you have any goals? And by goals, I mean certain things you may want to write or accomplish at some point, right? And maybe it is a trilogy of some sort. Maybe it is a genre that you haven't attempted and you may really want to try. Or is there something there at some point you want to say, it's not the time yet, but I really do want to try this?
I don't know. I don't know that I have like the mindset to create like series and trilogies. I was asked this the other day, and I thought about it. I haven't even really read that many series, and I never thought about it. And I was like, okay, maybe that's like what. And I'm really more of like a standalone. Give me the book and let me know exactly right then what happens to these people. But then there's some authors that have, and this intrigues me, which is what I may try to do, is where it's one of those that you can read the book and you can read them in any order and you won't really be missing anything. So they're standalone, but they're interconnected. And so that's like, I think if anything, that's where it would go. I don't really, I think Twilight is probably the only actual series that I've fully read. And I don't know that I'm not good at cliffhangers. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just want to wrap it up. And I think I told you earlier, I was a very direct person. I think that's part of me. Like, I want you to fall in love with these people. I want you to like them and love their story. And I'm going to wrap it up, and then we're going to move on to the next one.
I understand completely, because I'm, especially with like TV shows and stuff, I hate waiting, the week for the next episode. So sometimes I may avoid it till the entire thing's available, just so I can watch it, right? So I understand completely that mindset, because I hate this. I don't want to have to wait till next Thursday to see what's going to happen.
Right. Or back when, they still do it when they end the season. And you're completely like, well, what happened? Now I got to wait a whole year? Like,
especially when they're these, either Disney or Netflix, and you wait a year and a half, but, not more. to get the next season. It's even worse now, those things.
I mean, that's how I feel about Stranger Things right now. I'm waiting 2-3 freaking years to try to get this last season.
No, they'll be in college by the time the next season rolls around. So.
Well, that's what I was thinking. I was like, those kids are like grown at this point. They're married. Nobody looks like they're even in high school. Like,
they're going to be in their 30s now.
Right? Are y'all just going to jump forward like 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think of that because, you know, you made a good point with that being very direct, right? Because I can talk, honestly, I can talk for hours and hours and hours of anything, right? Everything, anything. But generally, when I am talking about stuff, it is very straight to the point, very direct in terms of getting the message across, right? So that is one of the struggles I had a little bit of with the writing, is that it's just not my normal way of, you know, talking or even expressing to stretch some of this stuff out. I was like, for me, I was like, this happened and then this happened. I don't need to do this and then come around like this and go here. Because in my mind, it's like this goes here, right? So that's a little of the struggle I have with that, because I am, the way I think is more direct, right? It doesn't take that little loop of an expression to get you into that. It's just really like a sharp right turn to go right to that spot.
Yep.
Did you have some of that as well when you're writing? I know you said you went back and you know, put the feelings in or try to elaborate on that side, but on your first draft, did you feel you had some of that same issues, or did it kind of flow?
Oh yeah, there were times when I would be typing it and I was like, I know that I'm gonna have to fluff this out, but I just, you know, I was just trying to get it down, and I didn't want to lose my train of thought or what I was, you know, plotting for them. And, you know, it would be like, and then I went and did this, and I did this, and then, you know, and then I was like, even as I was typing it, I was like, no, this is not going to work. But, you know, you just got to get it down. And I mean, this goes back to when I was in, you know, writing papers in school, and they'd give you like it's got to be 500 words, and I'd be like, well, I can tell you everything that you just asked for in like 150, you know. And so then I've got to write it down, and then I've got to go back in and fill it in and just give you some fluff. You want some fluff? Well, here you go, you know. And so
and then you have some of the ones that are writing and they need to take stuff out of it, right? They're like, too much. You got to shorten this. And you know, you and I are sitting here going, how am I going to get these extra words, because this story's done already?
Well, and you know, when you're writing a whole book, it's a fine line of giving people enough to make them feel and want to keep reading and to get invested in these people.
Yeah.
And then you can cross over real quick into giving them too much and losing them, because now I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about anymore. You know, I mean, I was trying to help this girl that found me on TikTok the other day, and I was trying to help her, as she asked me to help her beta read. And I was like, okay. And I'm thinking, usually beta readers, you know, usually you've got the story pretty much done. You're just trying to make sure that like it makes sense and that the time flows right, you know. And I was like, I was reading it, and I mean, it was just all over the place. And I was like, I don't even know what I'm reading anymore. My husband was looking at me and he was like, why do you look like that? And I said, I feel like I'm just, one minute this person's doing this, the next one it's totally something different, and then it's like I'm reading somebody's just writing in their diary, and I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. And I honestly, I had to tell her, I was like, I'm not to be rude, but I was like, I can't finish this, like I can't even follow it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the thing, is like, I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've read Pull of the Moon. I mean, people are like, how many times did you read your book? And I'm like, I can't even count, because I don't know.
Yeah, you have to. You change, little things change here, and then you change something later, and you go, wait a minute, that's not going to make sense now. You got to go back here, and it's crazy how much you really do reread your own work over and over and over again.
And then even just, you know, when you pick back up to start writing wherever you left off, and then you're like, okay, well, I've got to at least read the last couple things I wrote to make sure that I'm still thinking I left off where I left off. Like,
Yeah, it's it's one of the things when I decided to start doing this is, again, I for the author to stick with their voice, right? To stick with what's their genuine voice. And one of the things I made the decision with is, when I read certain things as well, I love the descriptive part of it, but sometimes it's like I don't need that much description, right?
Right.
I don't need, you know, two paragraphs of how the wind's blowing to understand the scene, to be in the scene, right? I don't need that much. And it's just I can't do it. Personally, I can't do it because that's just not the way I, communicate. It's not the way I think,
Right.
right? So I made the decision I'm not going to try to do it that way. I'll be descriptive, but I can't go in that detail. And I know there's people out there that are similar to that. They're probably like, I don't need this much as well, right? And you have to make the decision where there's probably going to be a lot of people that read my stuff and go, no, it's not enough. You're not enough words. It's not enough description. I needed more description, right? I really needed every detail of what that farm looked like. And you're like, but it's not even that important to the story.
Right.
You don't,
Right.
you don't really need to know, what the color of the farm was or how many yards the thing was for the gate. Um, and it's just I made the decision where I know some people are just not going to like it. They're going to say, I need a more, right? I need a more description. I wanted to know more about this, but I can't do it, right? So it wouldn't be genuine to me to try to do that. It would really be, like you said, fluffing it up, and then you lose your story, right? Because you're just putting too much effort in trying to follow that kind of style, and I just couldn't do it.
Well, and it's like either way that you go, if you're too descriptive, you're not, some people aren't going to like it. If you're not descriptive enough, another set of people are not going to like it. And so it's like you said, you've just got to stay true to the type of storyteller that you are.
Yep.
And, it'll find its people.
I mean, because honestly, for me, I just wanted to write stuff that I wanted to read, right? And for the werewolf book, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't the same werewolf book everybody's read, right? I didn't want have to be a full moon for people to change. I didn't want it from a bite. I didn't want it from the curse. I tried to stay away from. I just wanted a different storyline, right? Just something different. As I wrote that, and it was interesting. I was actually on TikTok today. Another author posted a little meme, and I was laughing when I read it, and she basically put that somebody went to Stonehenge and left a 1-star review because there wasn't enough rocks, right? And she's like, it really goes to tell you, don't worry about a 1-star review because you're just not going to get everybody to like what you do. It's not possible. No matter what you do, you're not going to get 100% of the people to like it. There's going to be some people that hate it or just can't stand it, but it's not really against your skill, your talent, or even your story. It's not going to go for everybody.
Well, and I'm sure you've seen it, but like a lot of what's on social media about romance books right now is like red flag boyfriends, and while they're entertaining to read and I enjoy reading those, that's not who like I write, and like when I was writing Nate in Pool of the Moon, he's a just genuine good guy. Now, does he mess up? Yes, because he's human and he makes mistakes and he does dumb stuff. But like, he's not malicious. He's not a bad guy. He's not, you wouldn't. I mean, he's honestly like the guy that girls would want to fall in love with, and that was my idea in writing him. Was who would I, what kind of guy would make me fall in love with him, and that's it. And I'm just like, sometimes when I'm looking at people talking on TikTok and stuff, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Like Nate's not, and I'll even tell people when they are like, oh, I'm going to read your book. And I'm like, okay, well, I've seen what your other books are that you're reading. And this is not that. And I'm like, this might be your palate cleanser with those books because this is nothing like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It was same thing. When I was looking for search terms, keywords and stuff for werewolf, right? To see,
Mm-hmm.
For the, when you load up the book and you do the marketing and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
it's crazy still to me how much werewolf romance there is out there, right? It's like I was like, what is going on? I don't
Right.
understand this, right? I understand the romance genre, right? I just don't understand what happened with that mixture, and it's enormous, right? I was like,
Mhm.
I just don't understand it, and I purposely made sure to keep that out of the book for that reason. I was like, I don't even want to touch on that for that reason because I just don't understand that viewpoint. The werewolf is aggressive, right? He's basically going to eat you. He's going to tear you
Right.
apart and eat you.
Right.
So I just don't understand where that's like the ultimate red flag boy right there, right? Because he's at some point
Yep.
your dinner at some point, right? After maybe the third date or whatever.
Well, and like maybe it's my horror thing, but like when I hear werewolf, I go to American Werewolf in Paris. That's like where my mind, as soon as you say werewolf, that's where my head goes. Not to a romance. It's,
Yeah.
you know, so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's because of Twilight or all the other ones, because that's always kind of why I really love the werewolf was, they really made the vampire, really like the gigolo. He's just basically the
Hmm.
sex symbol all the time. And again, I go, do you guys remember what these characters were all about before? It just
Right.
completely took it away from what they were, right, or what they are.
Yep.
And yeah, it just really threw me off how enormous the werewolf romance genre was.
It's surprising. Yes.
Yeah. I do want to remind the viewers that I will leave down below in the description of the video all the links for Shawna, for the book, for websites, socials, anything she wants to put up there for you to find her. Definitely, leave us a comment for any questions for either of us, or if you just want to tell us what you enjoyed about the show. And I just want to thank you, Shawna, for coming on. I really enjoyed this and had a lot of fun.
Me too. Thank you again for having me. This was great.
Yeah, and thank you, viewers, for watching, and goodbye.
Goodbye.